Can getting back to basics help the New York Giants running game in 2022? We're going to talk about that next on the LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the LockedOn Giants podcast, part of the LockedOn Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina. It is Tuesday, July 12th. We are getting you ready for New York Giants training camp. It is coming up faster than you know it. And to get you ready, we are looking at each of the Giants position units all this week into next week. Might as well get started and end summer vacation and get everything rolling. So I'm excited about it. I'm excited to get to training camp and start bringing you some new content regarding how the team looks. So thank you as always for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the New York Giants running backs. And then specifically, we're going to talk about whether getting back to basics can help this unit in 2022. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the focus is going to be obviously on Saquon Barkley, who will be 2 years removed from the torn ACL that he suffered, who should be all that much better. And he's in a different and more modern offensive scheme. So the expectations are sky high. And we'll talk about how the Giants have been getting back to basics, stuff that Saquon does well. And we'll take a look back at history at his rookie year, how the Giants coaching staff deployed him, what the numbers were. We'll take a look at how things kind of got off the track and just what the expectations will be if Saquon Barkley balls out. So let's get right into it. We're going to start off with a recap of how we got to this point. The Giants running game, I think we can all agree, has not been very good. It's been okay, but it hasn't been what we've expected exactly. Largely, given the fact that the Giants had Saquon Barkley, the number 2 overall pick in the 2018 draft. He looked dynamite as a rookie, but since then, injuries, scheme, personnel, just the running game hasn't been what we thought it would be. And that has prompted a lot of people to say, well, gee, Saquon Barkley, maybe wasn't the right pick, and in retrospect, you can make that argument. But let's take a look at how we got to this point with the expectations for Barkley having come crashing down to earth and making the Giants running game basically, from being a wow factor to a meh factor. All right. I think first thing we have to talk about when it comes to the running game and Saquon Barkley is the injuries. All right. In his rookie season, he was able to play a full season, didn't miss any games. Second season, he missed 3 games due to a high ankle sprain. Wasn't quite the same, but he still managed to crack 1,000 yards rushing in that second season in 2019. His third season, the ACL on grass, no less, early in the season. A lost year for him, unfortunately, a devastating knee injury, needed reconstructive ACL surgery, not reparative, but reconstructive. So when he came back in his 4th season, which would have been last year, he looked okay. In the beginning, maybe a little tentative, almost as though he wasn't trusting that knee of his. There were times when you saw flashes of him maybe looking like his old self, but just not enough of them, to be honest with you. And, the thought process was that give him 2 full years to come back from that injury, from that surgery, and he'll start to look more like himself. So the second year is coming up. It remains to be seen if he's going to look like himself, but that's kind of where we were at with the injury factor. And then, of course, throw in the sprained ankle or freak injury at that he suffered that cost him, I think it was 3 games last year. And just not a good season for Saquon Barkley from a health perspective. Okay, up next, we have to talk about how Barkley was deployed from 2018 to 2019. Now, it's interesting because Pat Shurmur was the head coach in both those seasons. And for some reason, the Giants changed up how they deployed Barkley as a runner in 2019. Now, I don't know if that was because they had a change in quarterback and they figured that, with Daniel Jones now being the starting quarterback in 2019, they could deploy him a little bit more in the running game and then, have him do some of those outside runs and have Saquon do more runs up the middle. I'm not sure what the thinking was here, but I'll give you some numbers. Again, these are from Pro Football Focus. In 2018, 129 of Barkley's 261 rushing attempts were to the outside, all right, where he is at his best. Get him out in space, isolate him against a linebacker or a defensive back. Chances are he's going to win that battle. He's going to be able to bowl those guys over. But in 2019, he had 216 rushing attempts, and only 100 of those went to the outside. So a little bit of a drop off there. And again, I'm not really sure why, but the other interesting thing of note here is in 2018, most of Barkley's outside runs went to the left side, whereas in 2019, a lot of them went to the right side. So again, it could be personnel related. It could have been something with the scheme, but the question I guess I'm getting at is why fix what wasn't broken? So they changed it up a little bit. Now, Barkley in 2019 did crack 1,000 yards. He had 1,003 rushing yards, but really not the impact that he had, I don't think at any rate, in 2018. So that being said, that leads to the next thing as to how we kind of got here. And that is, I've long questioned whether the Giants in the beginning overused Barkley. Now, I know that's going to sound ridiculous because if you got a talent, you want him on the field, you want to get the ball in his hands. Well, folks, football is a team game, right? You want to make sure that you get your best talents the ball, but you also want to be smart because you don't want to advertise to the defense that Saquon Barkley is going to touch the ball every single time, right? I question that the Giants might have overused Barkley at times, maybe not giving him enough of a breather. It got to the point where I think every third series, I think it was, Barkley would get a breather. All right. Instead of mixing it up a little bit, maybe taking some of the onus off of him. Now, again, the expectations could be, well, he's the number 2 overall draft pick. Let's get the ball in his hands and not worry about overusing him. But, sometimes you got to ration out your carries and your touches for your best skill position players because that can wear them out. You don't want to put extra tread on their tires before they turn 25. And that seemed to be the direction the Giants were headed in. So that was something that I wondered about with how we got to this point with the Giants running game not really being what I think a lot of people were expecting. All right. And then the other thing, this kind of ties in with the injuries, was his confidence. All right. To watch Saquon Barkley, and Saquon actually talked about it this past spring about how his confidence maybe wasn't what it needed to be. But if you watched him last year, there were times when he clearly looked like he didn't trust his knee. There were also times when you sat there and you said to yourself, gee, is he trusting the blocking in front of him by the offensive line, which really wasn't very good. So there was a matter of confidence. And when you don't trust the elements around you, that tends to sabotage your efforts. Now, Saquon, gives it his all. I'm not saying that he dogged it or anything like that, but the results just weren't there. And yes, again, I've got to acknowledge the ankle injury was an issue, but Saquon just did not look like himself in terms of that confidence, that swagger, and that was all missing. So all of that has helped to contribute to the Giants running game going from being something really special with a number 2 overall pick in the draft to just another ordinary, run-in-the-mill type of running game. All right. So how are the Giants addressing this? How are they trying to get Saquon to be himself again? Stick around. I'll tell you right after this. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, BetOnline.net is the only place that offers the best information on the latest odds, contests, and player props for all your sports betting needs. No matter what sport you're into, betonline.net has you covered. Plus, they offer everything you need to know for live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head on over to betonline.net today to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, and we are talking New York Giants running back. And as we get you ready for training camp, we're talking about a different position group every single day as we wait for July 19th to come around. That's when the rookies report, and then the veterans are reporting July 26th. And on today's show, we're talking about getting back to basics for the New York Giants running game. So basically, we've been talking about Saquon Barkley and how things kind of fell off the rails for Saquon Barkley and the Giants running game. You know, not all his fault, injuries, different things happen to knock it off the rails. But let's talk about now how the Giants are trying to get Saquon Barkley back to being Saquon. All right. So a few things we saw in the springtime. Number one, they're focusing on getting Saquon into space, not just as a receiver, but also as a running back. A lot of times, I mentioned before, Saquon was sent up the middle on runs right into the teeth of the defense. And Saquon, you watch him play, and he wasn't really one to lower his shoulder and push the pile. A lot of times, if he was going up the middle, he would try and bounce it out to the outside to his safety catch, where he had a little bit more space to operate. The coaching staff, in asking him to run based on what we saw in the springtime, that's what it looks like they're going to be doing a little bit more of. And that's not to say that Barkley won't eventually, be asked to run a few plays up the middle, but maybe not as many as he did in 2019 and then again in 2021. So that's one thing. We mentioned getting him in space. So they're going to go back and use him as a receiver a little bit more. That was something that the Giants got away from. For whatever the reason, maybe the injury had something to do with it, because if I'm not mistaken, in 2019, Barkley suffered his ankle injury, a high ankle sprain at that, suffered it early in the season. I think it was the third game that he suffered it. Might have been Daniel Jones's first start, as a matter of fact. So that could have been why they moved away from it. But, the bottom line is they never went back to it. They certainly didn't do it last year. Barkley saw a lot of check down passes, big deal. Get him in space, put him against a linebacker or a defensive back where he can absolutely blow the guy off the line and just, pick up the yards after the catch. So that is something that the Giants are doing. They've been putting him in motion. They've been lining him up in the slot. They've been putting him out wide. They've been asking him to run certain pass patterns, much like a receiver would. So basically, Barkley is almost like a pseudo receiver in this offense based on what we saw in the spring. The other important thing, now this remains to be seen, but I think this is going to happen based on, what I saw and also just based on some conversations I have. Barkley is going to get his share of touches. He's going to get his share of snaps, but I don't think you're going to see a type of rotation where he comes out and gets a blow every third series. The Giants are going to have plays in which Matt Breida is going to be on the field. I think you're going to see Matt Breida, as a matter of fact, a lot more than maybe you would have seen the number two back, the backup to Saquon Barkley in the past. And that's important because, again, at this point, Barkley has taken a few shots to his lower body. You want to hope that he still has the explosiveness and that change of direction and that power in his legs, which, based on the spring, again, looked like all that stuff was there. But if you want to keep him that way. And in order to do that, you got to take off some of the mileage. You got to not have him wear himself down. I know that sounds counterproductive. That sounds silly. You're thinking, well, he's one of your best weapons, allegedly, so why not have him out there? You can't overdo it, folks. If you start to overdo it, the defense is going to hone in on him. You're going to wear him out. And more importantly, it's more exposure to injuries. So I think you're going to see more of a balance, kind of like a 1-2 punch, if you will, with Matt Breida, assuming Breida is healthy and in the lineup. Okay, one other thing I want to mention, I talked about confidence in the last segment. Barkley's confidence is coming back. And a big part of that is, again, the coaching staff has sat down with the key playmakers and said, hey, guys, what do you like to do? What do you do best? And how do you think it could fit in what we want to do? So that feedback that they're getting from the players, Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, et cetera, you can run down the list. That's going to be important because all too often we have seen with prior to coaching staffs that they have tried to jam a square peg into a round hole and it doesn't work. You have to be flexible. You have to say, okay, you know what? Maybe my running back isn't at his best going up the gut, between the tackles, going into the teeth of the defense because he's not going to lower his shoulder and push guys forward. Maybe I've got to get him outside more. Maybe I've got to have him do more cutbacks or off tackle runs. So these are all things that are coming into this offense. Now, whether or not they're kept, that remains to be seen because remember, in the springtime, the coaching staff does a lot of experimenting with different looks and different formations and decides what they're going to keep in the playbook, what they're going to get rid of. So overall, the Giants so far have been doing little things to get Saquon Barkley back to being Saquon Barkley. And if they can do that, the Giants running game should become potent once again. It hasn't really been something that has, knocked the socks off of anybody, but they're working to get it that way. Now, do I think the running game is going to be the feature part of the offense? No, I think it's going to be a passing offense. But the running game needs to play its role. It will have an important role. They just need to get them back up and running, no pun intended, so that they can contribute what they need to help set up the pass. Now, let's assume that Barkley does have a good year. And again, we can't really attach numbers, I don't think, to this, though I'll talk about that in just a minute. What would be the next step for the Giants? Would they re-sign him? Since this is the final year of his contract, he's in his option year. Well, we'll talk about that coming up next. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, there's only one place to find what you need quickly for your car or truck, and that's at rockauto.com. Rock Auto has over 20 years of offering competitive pricing on thousands of parts for every make, model, and manufacturer. Check out their extensive website, and don't forget to write down Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. RockAuto.com has amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car or truck will ever need. That's RockAuto.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, and we are talking about back to basics, getting the Giants running game back on track. It's been okay, but, middle of the pack, sometimes towards the bottom of the pack, and really not reflective of the talent that they have, specifically in Saquon Barkley. A number of factors behind that, as we've been discussing. But let's now talk about what happens if Saquon Barkley balls out. Now, I like to be obviously optimistic. I don't want to talk about what happens if he doesn't ball out, because if he doesn't ball out, hey, they get another running back. It's that simple. But let's talk about what happens if he balls out. What kind of numbers are we looking at? What do we need to see? Numbers are kind of tricky, but I would say if Barkley has numbers similar to what he had as a rookie, I would think that they would want to re-sign him. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky, and I've got some numbers here. Speaking of numbers, I have some numbers here. What kind of a contract do you give him? Remember, he's the number 2 overall pick in the 2018 draft. There was a time when everybody thought that one day he might be the highest paid running back in the NFL. And then, of course, the injuries happen. Do the Giants now, if Barkley has that kind of a season where he has 2,000 all-purpose yards, do they make him the highest paid running back? I say no. Absolutely not. I would not make that investment. History has shown, you look at Todd Gurley of the Rams, Christian McCaffrey down in Carolina. You just don't invest big bucks in a running back. It doesn't make sense. Now, Are there exceptions? Yeah, rarely. I mean, once in a while you get a guy who just he's an Iron Man and nothing happens and you can make that kind of investment. But let's talk about what kind of a contract might work best for Barkley if he balls out. All right. Now, me personally, if it were my call, I would not give him a 5-year deal. I would keep him to maybe at the most a 3 to 4 year deal, maybe a 4-year deal tops. Now, I checked on SpotTrack to see what his market value is. SpotTrack has him a market value for him 4 years, 22.613 million, which comes out to about 5.6 million per year, less than what he is due to make, by the way, on the option year of his rookie deal. Could I live with that if I'm the Giants? Yeah, I think I could. I think I could for that amount. That's in line with Kareem Hunt of Cleveland, who's making about 6 million. The Chargers, Austin Eckler, who's making about 6.1 million. Yeah, I could live with that, I think. Again, now here's where the question comes in. And by the way, in terms of guys who are really making a lot of money, I mentioned, McCaffrey. Joe Mixon is averaging something like 12 million a year, according to SpotTrack. Alvin Kamara of the Saints, I think, is averaging about 15 million a year. I wouldn't pay Saquon Barkley that kind of money. It just doesn't work, especially, here's what you got to consider. After this season, you're going to have Xavier McKinney, I believe, is going to be eligible for a new contract. Andrew Thomas is going to be eligible to negotiate a new contract. And if Joe Shane is going to look to get these guys locked up before they have a chance to come anywhere near free agency, you cannot devote big money to a running back. It just doesn't work. And you also have to remember, there's a possibility that Daniel Jones might be up for a big money deal. And that's where you want to devote your resources. So I think with Saquon, if he has a good year, 2,000 all-purpose yards, you re-sign him, the 4-year deal averaging about 5 million. I think everybody could live with that. But I just would not go crazy with a big contract for him, because you're asking for trouble. You're asking for potentially to mess up your salary cap down the line, especially, like I said, when you have these other big names that you're going to have to address at some point. And yes, look, I know the salary cap is going up, folks, but still, you can't just go throwing money around. And especially at a position where the guy has a little bit of an injury history. All right. The guy is also getting up there in age as he, goes on in his career. And it's a position where, I hate to say it, but running backs are usually a dime a dozen. So if you look hard enough, you can find somebody to do what you need them to do within your offensive scheme. Now, do they have the talent of a Saquon Barkley? No, but you could probably find guys, one guy who could maybe do the receiving end, one guy who could do the running end, and the two guys combined could probably cost you a lot less than the one guy in Saquon Barkley. So that's how I would see that playing out. Obviously, you'd want to have some incentives in the contract for Saquon Barkley, for Pro Bowl, probably for 1,000-yard season, all-purpose yards, and little things they can throw in there, little triggers and whatnot. But you just can't go crazy with overpaying a running back. And I think right now a lot of people ask me, do I see Saquon returning? And I think it's to be determined, because if he gets hurt again, if he stays healthy but doesn't quite, look like his 2018 self, I think you have to move on. And it's going to hurt because, again, the number 2 overall pick in the draft, when they could have either traded down or gotten an offensive lineman at that spot, that's going to hurt. You don't want to have to give up on a top 10 pick. You don't want to have to give up on a first-round pick at all if you can help it. But you just can't compound a mistake if that's what it turns out to be. So fingers crossed that Saquon Barkley can pull together. Matt Breida will be, like I said, I have a feeling Matt Breida will see a lot of snaps, this year, probably more so than the average backup. The third running back spot is still up for grabs. I think keep an eye on Jashawn Corbin, the undrafted rookie free agent, that's a guy that I thought looked pretty good in the spring. But again, you got to put the pads on and all that other good stuff. And then at fullback, they have this kid, Jeremiah Hall, who I think could be the prototypical fullback that Brian Dable likes to have for his offense. So those are a couple of the lesser names that I'm watching for the summer, Corbin and Jeremiah Hall. And I think that's going to round out the Giants running back room if they go with 3 backs and they go with a fullback. And then don't forget, a couple of the receivers, Tony and Wan'Dale Robinson can give them some carries if they need it as well. So that's how I see the running back room playing out. Will they get back to being, the upper half of the league? That remains to be seen, but keep it here all summer long. We'll keep you updated as well as when we get into the season. And meanwhile, we will continue to break down the New York Giants position units ahead of training camp. So thanks so much for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We'll come back with you tomorrow with another position preview here on the LockedOn Giants podcast.